All right, and I will say once again, good afternoon. And today we welcome Basil Camu, Treecologist from the Raleigh-based tree care company Leaf and Limb. Leaf and Limb defines a treecologist as someone who believes that trees are essential to the well-being of life on Earth and acts accordingly. Basil is an International Society of Arboriculture board certified master arborist. He's a graduate of Duke University and a self-described wizard of things at Leaf and Limb. Though trees are his passion and his profession, he also loves tending native flowers in his garden, growing Piedmont prairies, and propagating plants from seed. Today, Basil will share a presentation with us that will identify 8 different strategies that gardeners can incorporate into our work that will help build a healthier ecology where life can thrive. So we say welcome, Basil, and thank you for making this information available to our Extension Master Gardener volunteers. And I will stop my share so that you can get your slides lined up.
All right, I'm going to share my screen. Let me know if you cannot hear me. I'd like to go ahead and share my.
You sound great.
Excellent.
And the screen looks good too.
Wonderful. Well, thanks so much for having me today. I'm very excited to be here. Thanks for the kind introduction. At Leaf and Limb, we care for trees because we love the planet, and this means we do things that improve their health, keep them around for longer. We love to plant trees, and then also we spend a lot of our time talking about the importance of trees and helping people work with them. So that's why I'm here today, because we love sharing knowledge. So I'm going to kick it off with a bit of a downer, and then I want to assure you that it's going to get better from here. But I sort of just want to set the stage a little bit for some of the ecological issues that are taking place. And I realize that many of you will know all of this already. Some of you, there may be some new content about these issues that I'm going to speak about briefly. But the reason I do want to go through them is just so we have some baseline knowledge here. So there are sort of 5 main categories that I want to talk about. One is the loss of trees. We have essentially cut down about half of the world's forests, especially over the last 250 years, but really it goes back beyond that. Ever since humans began doing modern agriculture, we began clearing trees. So it's been going on for a while. We obviously need trees, which we'll talk about more later. With the loss of trees comes the loss of topsoil, and that's been an ongoing issue for, again, at least 10,000 years, but again, particularly the last 250 years. And the reason I'm sort of picking on the last 250 years, we've just gotten better at farming and at development and making roads, bigger machines, more efficient. It just means we're getting better at cutting down trees and clearing soil. There's some pretty morbid estimates out there. Some folks estimate we only have about 60 harvests left. Who knows exactly what it is, but one thing's for certain, we need healthy soil and we need a lot of it. We'll be talking about that today as well. Next on the list is water. And this one to me is probably the most scary. We've got a lot of major aquifers here on planet Earth, and these are these big underground reservoirs that hold water. And about 40 such aquifers that NASA monitors very closely. And of these 40, 26 are in very bad condition. Another 13 are in, so pretty much all of them are in trouble and to varying degrees. Running out of clean water is a very real concern. We've seen this happen. Cape Town very nearly ran out of water a few years back. Istanbul, parts of Europe right now are under water restrictions. We've seen it in California. Water is a real concern. It ties very closely to soil and trees. These 3 things, water, soil, and trees, they really work in tandem. You need each of them in abundance, diversity, and in healthy states to be able to sustain life. Okay, 2 more things. Sorry for all the bad news today. We'll get to some fun stuff, I promise. CO2, there's been a lot of change in the CO2 that's in the atmosphere. That's leading to a whole variety of issues, many things that we can't predict. What I think of when I think of CO2 is, yes, it's a problem empirically speaking. in terms of being in the atmosphere, and we need to reduce it, but it's also a state of the well-being of life. When we don't have many trees and soil is denuded and the creatures are dying, which is our final point we'll get to shortly, of course, CO2 is being released. So yes, it's empirically a problem, and it's an indicator of something much worse, which is the state of life on Earth. Which brings me to my fifth final negative point. Life is suffering, and I mean non-human life. I'm talking about birds, insects. Just yesterday, I saw research out from Nature Conservancy. There's been an 82% decline in insect populations around the world in just the last 40 years. Mammals, very similar, huge numbers. What we're seeing, over 60% decline in mammals and fish. These are just very concerning numbers. So I don't want to leave you on a negative note. Of course, that's the whole point of today, is what can we do? And I think this is the really exciting thing. I think when we hear negative news, it's often overwhelming and there's not much that we can necessarily do about these things. But in this case, we can use our yards and our HOAs and the places that we work and live in our green spaces to actually make an appreciable difference for all of those 5 things we just discussed. Everything I'll be teaching you today is couched in that idea: increasing the population of trees, increasing the health of our soil, which leads to increasing water reserves and helping increase the abundance and diversity of life. And all of that will have a net effect of helping reduce CO2. These things all work together. I'm going to pause there for my first set of questions before we get into some of these 8 tips, because that's a lot. I just threw a lot at you in about 3 minutes. So what are your questions to begin with? And I can look at the chat screen, or are you going to, or how do you want to do this?
Yeah, right now, I don't see any questions entered into the chat just yet.
Okay.
If anyone would like to unmute, we'll give you a minute to do that. Otherwise, we'll keep going. All right, Basil, I say let's forge on and we'll keep an eye on that chat.
Perfect. Okay. I'm going to start with my first recommendation, which goes without saying. It's planting and saving more trees. This is sort of a general softball. Again, most of you know this. We'll get into a lot more specifics, but I want to just go back to all those things we just talked about. So when we're talking about soil, trees are the thing that creates soil. And I'm going to use trees as shorthand for all plants, preferably native plants, which we'll talk about. But they pull energy from the sun and they turn that energy into sugar that they then feed out into the roots and all the little organisms that live there. And those organisms, they live and they thrive and they reproduce and they die and they poop and they do all the things that they do and they tunnel around. And that life is what creates healthy soil. The byproducts, the humic acids, the glomalin, the structure. You can think of life in the soil is what creates healthy soil. It's the difference between dirt and topsoil. So trees can address that. When we're talking about water, again, trees and healthy soil address this as well. So if you think about a parking lot, and imagine a parking lot that is 1 acre, and an inch of rain, 25,000 gallons of water run off of that parking lot. Now, if you take that same acre and you have green trees, shrubs, flowers, things that an ecosystem, less than 1,000 gallons will run off of that same acre. That is a substantial difference. And you start thinking about all the HOAs and all the many spaces in our suburban settings. An average HOA is going to be 600 acres. It is easy for an HOA to shed 1 million gallons of rainwater in one rain event in the summer. So with trees and healthy soil, we can begin pulling water down into the ground where it stays and it feeds life and it fills our aquifers versus rushing out into the oceans and creating erosion as it goes. We talked about carbon, and this is a place where trees and soil can make a really big difference. There's a great study from Crowther Lab out of Zurich, and this is now a little dated, back in, I guess it was 2020, I want to say. And they found that there's enough space on Earth areas that we're not even using. We're talking about old abandoned farms and places we're not even using for anything at all. And if we were to simply reforest these places, which are approximately 2 billion acres, sounds like a lot, but Earth is big. Just that act alone, we could pull down 2/3 of all the carbon we've put out in the atmosphere over the last 250 years. Substantial. And then finally, when we're talking about life, trees and soil, these are bedrocks to life. As a matter of fact, 80% of all life on land, they need trees and plants to survive. These are the places where they're feeding, where they're living. I would imagine many of you have read some of Doug Tallamy's work. He has just some really fantastic books, just getting very specific about, say, an individual oak tree. And let's look at, in case you haven't read Doug Tallamy's work, he states that according to his research, an oak tree can support as many as 1,000 different species of insects, which then go on to feed birds and bats and everything else. So there's this really beautiful food web that spirals off of an oak tree. Compare that to, say, a Japanese maple, which is a non-native plant, very beautiful, but it just isn't meant to be here. That plant will feed less than 10 species of insects. So we're talking about 100x order of magnitude between an oak tree, a native oak tree, and a non-native Japanese maple. So thinking about and getting more native trees in the ground is a great way to address all of the issues I've just talked about. And we're not going to stop there. We're going to keep going. So number 2, prioritizing mature trees over young trees. This is really important. I think, and I'm going to make one last disclaimer here, and then I'm going to stop saying this. I think many of you probably know this, but I just want to, for those of you who may not, cutting a tree down and planting a new one is not an even swap. An a mature tree like this one here on screen, this is a 350-year-old oak tree. There's some really fascinating research where they actually measure all the surface area of the leaves and the twigs and the bark and the root systems. And they find that there is an exponential difference between a mature tree and a young tree. And the only way to get the benefits of that mature tree are time itself. There's no speeding up time. You can't get this oak except for waiting 350 years. And you can't move this oak. So it's really important that we prioritize mature trees if we want exponential benefits for non-human life, but also for building healthy soil and for holding water and these sorts of things that we've been talking about. All right. I'd like to maybe stop every 2 points or so and take some questions, especially because I think we're making pretty good time. So let's take a few questions.
So one comment from Susan was relating to that Raleigh may now be having some restrictions on parking lots. Hopefully they're looking at permeable surfaces. Do you know anything about that, Basil? Is there some improvement in that area of new parking lots in the city?
Yeah, I know they are looking at some improvements, and I do want to commend Raleigh on being probably one of the most progressive cities in North Carolina in terms of its tree codes. However, I think there's a lot more we could be doing. And just so you all know, every single city and municipality has a governing document. It's typically called a UDO, Uniform Development Ordinance, or an LDO, Land Development Ordinance. This is an opportunity for you, if you ever really want to get in the nitty-gritty of helping steer what your city allows and doesn't allow. That's where it happens. It's the LDO or the UDO or whatever that municipality may have. And every developer and every neighborhood and every shopping center is beholden to that document. So that's an important piece for those of you who want to make change.
So again, those were the Uniform Development Ordinance or the Limited Development?
Land Development Ordinance. There's a few other acronyms. You'll see other acronyms as well, but those are the most common.
Cool, thank you. Another question was relating to back when you were talking about the aquifers and just looking kind of the question of how many aquifers in what amount of area was that on the, do we have 40 aquifers on the whole planet?
Yeah.
Or where is there more reading that we can share with people or a link about learning about the aquifers?
If you Google NASA monitor aquifers, there is a designated page from NASA just for this thing. They just for monitoring aquifers. They keep a very close eye on this, and they're doing it from space and other ways. I have no idea. The page is fairly fascinating, and the research is all there. I could find the URL after the presentation, but if you Google it, you should be able to find it.
Thank you. And just one last comment at this point about a local church that is using pervious materials in their parking lot. So that is good news. The more of that, the better.
Wonderful.
And I think we're caught up at that point.
Okay, well, let's keep going. All right, point number 3, using proper planting. So there's 2 easy ways we kill trees. We either pile mulch around the base, which you're seeing here in this picture. This is called a mulch volcano, or we plant them too deep. Now, what's really challenging about this is most of the time when you buy material from the nursery, particularly trees, and I speak from experience, we plant thousands of these trees every year. I would estimate that 99% of trees come from the nursery with a buried root collar. Now, a root collar is, if you can imagine, a trunk goes to the ground and then it spreads out at the base. It spreads out and turns into roots. So that flare, that spread at the base of the trunk, that is the root collar. The really challenging thing is that when these trees come from the nursery, you have to first take the time to actually open the root collar. And most people just don't realize that. So they think, oh, I didn't plant it too deep because I got the top of my soil level with the surrounding grade. But the problem is that's not good enough because the tree's already buried from the nursery. So that's the trick. Open up that root collar first. You need to see a flare at the base of the trunk where it turns into roots. That is what needs to be above ground. If that's above ground, and if that's not buried with a big old mulch volcano, then that tree is likely going to do just fine. That is the most important thing with proper planting. We could get into a lot of other details, but that is the 80% that matters. I want to keep going. Also when planting, I very much recommend selecting native species. This is a pretty well-known topic by now, but just if this is new to you, a native species is one that has evolved in this area. And trees, as you can imagine, they don't want their leaves to be eaten by an insect. So what they do is they build these defenses that keep the insect from eating the leaf. And these defenses either make the leaf taste bad or just outright kill it. It takes a very long time for these insects to be able to overcome those defenses. In some cases, it could be 100,000 years. It just depends exactly on what we're talking about. But it's ecological time spans, not human time spans. We live very short lives. In the grand scheme of ecology, 100,000 years would be like a year for a human, maybe. That's sort of a way to sort of think about this. So it takes a very long time for these insects to learn how to beat the defenses of the tree. Once it does that, now it can feed from the tree. So we want trees that have been here for a long time because the insects that live here can overcome those defenses. Those are called native trees. I also mentioned near native here because there are trees from nearby, say a coffee tree from Kentucky. There are other trees that do provide value here as well. Maybe not as much value as a species that is from, say, Wake County or North Carolina, but there's still some value. So as you plant, think about using native or near native species. It's the easiest thing you can do to help non-human life, especially if you're already going to plant a tree. I can guarantee you there's a species that is native that fits what you're looking for, whatever your goal might be. I'm going to add just a little, actually, no, I'm going to stop there. I want to talk next about some other stuff related to this, but let's go ahead and take a few more questions.
I think you just addressed a comment that someone made relating to, taking down a large oak at one's property, taking down a Japanese maple and trying to replace it with an oak, getting at the point where the space available, you were making the point, Basil, that depending on the space available, there is a tree that you can choose to fit that space. That's a native or a near native choice. And of course, taking into account the full growth, the full habit of that tree is important. So
Absolutely.
this
And
can work in even small yards.
most certainly, you can go with a large native shrub or a
Mhm.
small native tree. I mean, my favorite go-to right now is the native fringe tree. It's just really, it does well in dry conditions, wet conditions, salty conditions, full light, low light. It is what I would call just the all-around grand champion of small native trees in my book. That's just totally subjective, of course. But the point being is there's just a lot of, and if you say you want a large shrub, I don't know what the light conditions are and the sun conditions and the soil conditions, but there's a lot of really hardy shrubs. I mean, I know the wax myrtle gets overplanted in certain settings and people get tired of it, but I love the wax myrtle. It's so ecologically abundant and it's so hardy and it really is quite beautiful on its own. I don't think anybody ever takes they're always planted in these hedges that get sheared and stuff, but on its own, a very beautiful plant. And I know that there's a lot of resources. NC State has a fantastic plant finder database. I use it regularly. I would encourage you to go in there and select a parameter for native, and then you can narrow down your choices.
Perfect. That catches us up nicely. Charlotte is meanwhile putting things in the chat for us. She just included the link to the plant toolbox for that fringe tree, the Cyananthus. So,
Excellent. All right.
okay, I
Well,
think we could move on.
So on this same topic, I'll just mention actually, I'll just skip. Let me just show you this front page here. I love also, I meant to have NC State's on here. Sorry about that. But I also want to mention the Native Plant Finder here. It's a collaboration between Doug Tallamy and the National Wildlife Foundation. Another great resource. You can punch in your zip code and it'll list a bunch of species for your area. Now, you may not be able to find those species. That's always a great challenge. This is not meant to be a plug for Leaf and Limb, but we do have on our website, if you go to our website and you go to our services and you go to planting, there is a link there of native trees that are commonly available at nurseries. So you can cross-reference what you're finding with that document to see what you can actually get a hold of. And also on this native topic, I want to mention Project Panda. This is a not-for-profit thing that we at Leaf and Limb do. And it's something that you can actually do anywhere. And we'll be putting a blueprint out for this soon. But also consider in this discussion of natives, the fact that we can actually go out and collect seeds from native trees growing in our very own zip code. It's not terribly complicated to grow most species. It could be as simple as just putting some seeds in a pot potentially. Many trees grow that, if you collect the seed as it's about to fall and put it directly in a pot, there's a good chance something's going to sprout. So as you're thinking about these native trees, and especially if there's something you want that you can't find, it might already grow in your zip code, and then find some seeds and plant the tree. That's the underlying idea with Project Panda. And if that's of interest to you, if you ever want to learn more about this project and maybe starting one where you live, let us know. We'd love to help you out. Okay, I'm going to do a bonus point here today. This is sort of in the same vein of growing your own trees. I also want to put a plug in for a couple of really fantastic nurseries here in North Carolina, particularly Mellow Marsh out of Siler City. They grow a lot of small trees. So you can either grow your own or you can buy some from Mellow Marsh. There's a couple of other folks, but they're my favorite for what I'd call 1 to 2 year old saplings. Now, the beauty of working with young, very, 1 to 2 year old saplings is that you can plant them much more quickly. According to our work, you can put approximately 25 of these trees in the ground in about an hour. But by working with small plants, you can have access to far more native diversity. So Siler City has a great native plant lineup. And the cool thing is with these young trees, you can even get them mail ordered to you if necessary. When you plant these young trees, what we're playing around with, and we recommend considering, this is sort of a big idea for today, is plant them in really high density, put them approximately 2 feet apart. And you'll see here on the screen, this is actually a dated photo. What you're looking at is a whole series of trees that were planted. They were all about the size of a pencil. What you're seeing here is 2 months after going in the ground. Some of these trees are already 6 feet tall. And I'm happy to report that on this same site, which I'll get new photos soon, some of these trees are pushing 20 feet tall in literally 12 months. So there's a lot of really interesting benefits to growing trees in high density. Not only are they easy to put in the ground, not only do they grow quickly, not only can we get access to more of the native plants that we want, but you don't have to do all the maintenance in this space. You don't have to add mulch. You don't have to put in fertilizers. You don't have to do any of that work because this area itself mulches. It's going to shade out a lot of the competing forbs. It can become a really mostly maintenance-free space with a huge amount of ecological diversity and abundance, both above ground and below ground. I'll also mention on the same idea, it's a way to rethink hedges. So this is a hedge here, same concept, all native plants. They were all very small going in the ground. This whole row that you're looking at only took about maybe 6 hours to plant, not terribly difficult. It's approximately 800 square feet. And this is a space where we're reimagining what a privacy row looks like, because if you've ever had to recommend the privacy row, you know that there aren't many species to choose from. You either have to go with these classic non-natives, which aren't great, or you got a handful of natives you can choose from, like the wax myrtle that I mentioned earlier, Carolina cherry laurel, a handful of hollies. There aren't many options to choose from. And even if you go native, you have a monocrop. So if something happens to that species in that spot, they're all going to be potentially at risk. This gives you diversity. And then what I love, of course, I keep going back to this, but it provides a lot of abundance for life with different species of trees and, these are all shrubs. You can provide for different species of insects and birds. So we're maximizing diversity, we're minimizing maintenance. It's a win-win. I am going to stop right there because we're going to pivot to soil next. So what are your questions about native plants and or this different approach to planting?
So maybe you could explain a little more about the high density concept. A couple of questions that are coming in are relating to, should you plant all the same species?
Okay.
Or should you have a variety of species? And then secondly, won't all these plants crowd each other out? How do we handle that?
Good questions. All right, let me go into a bit more detail then. I'll give you the quick primer and get to some of these. So essentially, step one, we recommend laying some cardboard down, putting on a couple of inches of old leaves and a couple of inches of these arborist wood chips. These are the sorts of things you get for free from a tree service. Let that just sit for a while, 3 to 4 months. It's going to get mushy and start rotting, which is great. That's perfect. When fall rolls around, then we start planting these saplings, these 1-year-old, 2-year-old saplings. We definitely want a diversity of species. I would recommend at least 25 different species. You can go 50, you can go 80. The more the merrier, but at least 25 in my recommendation. If it's a forest, meaning you don't care about height restrictions, then you should think about doing some of these upper story trees like oaks and maybe some mid-story trees like beeches and maybe some lower level trees like a dogwood, and throw in some shrubs because we're trying to maximize that above ground space. So perhaps some Virginia sweetspire. If it's a hedge row like this, a privacy row, then you'll want to choose species that don't grow any taller than 20 feet. But the diversity is very important. The greater the diversity of species, the greater the life it supports, and the greater the resilience of the ecosystem. Once these are in the ground, really all you need to do is just manage the invasive plants. So, the typical culprits are going to be ligustrum, mulberry if you're living in an urban setting, English ivy. Every county in North Carolina is going to have their unique invasive plants, but that's really all you need to worry about, because it will, if you've laid down your cardboard and your wood chips in advance, you're not going to have to worry too much about herbaceous weed pressure. As they grow up, it will become a little bit of an issue, but it won't matter after 2 or 3 years because these trees will shade out the herbaceous plants. Now, is every one of these species going to make it? No. They're not all going to make it, but that's okay because we haven't wasted money or time. When we start analyzing the cost on these installations, doing this hedgerow that you're looking at in front of you is cheaper than planting a row of traditional 15 or 20 gallon plants. It's less work. So we're not losing time or money. There's no compromise here. We're actually gaining a lot. So we're gaining all the benefits I've described, and not needing to maintain this area is a big win, because you can imagine with a row of monocrop trees, just the same species, you're going to probably add wood chips every year, and you're going to maybe put compost down every year. You don't have to do that here. Over time, everything is there's going to be winners and losers, and some are going to find their spaces and some aren't, but you'll be left with as much ecological abundance and diversity. More specifically, you'll have as much green stuff above ground as you could possibly have. And ditto for below ground. All these roots, they're finding their spaces, they're interweaving. You really could not add more plant material to this area if you tried. And that's great for everything that we've talked about earlier. All of the non-human life, the soil building, everything. Is that helpful?
That's very helpful. There are a couple of questions that I'm seeing relate to, asking about specific plant choices. And from that perspective, we will be sending all of you a resources document after this webinar, which will have some great links to address some of your specific plant questions. Some folks are asking about smaller shrubs or options to put on a septic field or things like that. So Plant Toolbox is what that's all about. And so we'll be sending you out some help with those questions. I guess I would first bring up the point that earlier, Basil, you made one point, which is prioritizing large trees. And someone's asking, is that in conflict with this concept? And I believe what you're saying is, if you can save a large tree, do it, because look at how long it takes to replace what it contributes. If you've got an open space, here's a fast and diverse way to plant young saplings who will also grow fast.
Absolutely. And if you have existing trees, more reason you can actually incorporate this model under those trees. You'll just want to choose shade-loving understory trees and shrubs. So you can add a whole dense understory to an existing canopy. And the beauty of working with these saplings is they're so small that you typically just make one incision into the ground and open it and put the sapling in, which is great for the existing trees because that means we're not damaging their root system. So these ideas are not in conflict with mature trees, but I would caution you, don't remove mature native trees to do this. Augment those trees. And I'll add, if you would like really specific information on what we call them recipes at Project Panda. But if you want a recipe on one of these configurations, we've got a lot of resources that we've made publicly available at Project Panda. They're not very well refined quite yet, but we'd be happy to share them with you. So just shoot us an email. You can email me. I'll give out my email later in this presentation, or find Project Panda online.
Yeah,
and
we'll include all that for folks to get to you.
Perfect.
The one other point I would bring up, Basil, is someone's asking us a little bit about this model on a slope, planting this on a slope, and how what experience you have with that. Does it need a lot of staking? Because of course, many of us have these disturbed areas that are on slope, and we do want to get the roots to hold on again.
It's fantastic for slopes. It does really, really well. Working with these small trees is so easy. We've had great success. Actually, all of the models we're going to talk about are really well suited for slopes. And again, the costs are lower, the labor is lower. There's a good opportunity for this work on slopes. I would say slopes less than 45 degrees. Beyond 45 degrees, things get dicey. But yeah, I've worked on slopes that are approximately, they're probably like 35 degrees, and it's done well.
Thank you.
And ditto for septic fields, by the way. A lot of good research showing that plants help enhance septic uptake and things like that. All right, let's pivot to soil. We talked a little bit about this earlier. So I would call soil probably the most crucial thing when we're talking about tree health and abundance. It's so important. When it comes to soil health, there's two ways to think about it. There's one path, which is we actually help build healthy soil. And then there's a second path, and these can work together, which is do no harm. So let's talk about building healthy soil first. It doesn't have to be complicated. It really doesn't. I always look to the forest as inspiration. How does the forest build soil? Well, branches fall down in storms, trees fall down, leaves fall every year. So what is the equivalent in the urban setting? Well, leave the leaves when they fall. It doesn't mean you have to leave them exactly where they fall, but at least push them under your trees. Wood chips, that's kind of like, branches that are falling. So put a layer of wood chips around your trees. And I really recommend wood chips. Don't use the processed mulches. They're actually unhealthy for your trees. Triple shred and double shredded mulches, they become waterproof. And they actually, after some time, create more harm than good. They actually prevent your trees from getting water. So use the arborist wood chips. They don't become waterproof. And best of all, they're free. I could do an entire presentation just on the benefits of arborist wood chips, but I'm just going to leave it there. We talked about the leaves. The last bit I would recommend is thinking about compost. Anything in your yard can become compost. Anything from your kitchen can become compost. You can buy compost. However you get compost, you can sprinkle some around your trees. It's very healthy, very beneficial. You can also put that compost into a 5-gallon bucket with water. And now you've made something called compost tea, and you can pour that around your plants. So you have a liquid solution if you prefer. I'm simplifying things a little bit, but you can get 80% of the value with these simple approaches. Now, you could invest time learning more nuanced processes and get even greater benefits, but just these simple things, they're going to give you 80% of the value that I'm talking about. So those are the category of actively building soil. And notice I never said anything about fertilizers. Please, it's important that we understand trees don't need us to give them chemicals. Every element and chemical and macronutrient and micronutrient that a tree needs is in the soil already. They exist in the sand and the silt and the clay. The issue is we typically don't have the life necessary to extract those minerals to give to the plant. That's the problem in the urban setting. It's not a lack of chemicals, it's a lack of biology. So doing the things I've just discussed build the biology that then go and harvest all these nutrients that the trees need. And they form this beautiful symbiosis where they're exchanging what each other needs. And now you have healthy trees and you have healthy soil. Pouring fertilizers, anything that you buy in a box or in a bag or from a service provider that is not a compost tea is potentially going to harm the soil. And by soil, I mean the life in the soil. Again, another really big conversation. I'll mention just one little specific just to kind of pique your interest. Let's look at nitrogen, for example. When we put nitrogen in the soil, one of the things we do is we make it really, a lot of it leaches away. So now we're actually creating a pollution effect. We also kill some of the organisms that provide nitrogen for the tree. The tree may absorb some of it, but doing so is going to provide growth in a way that's not healthy for the tree. It's succulent growth that attracts pests. It also inhibits the tree from developing a root system like it should. So I may have just muddied the waters a little bit. I probably need to get into more nuanced detail there, but just in general, best to use wood chips, leaves, and composts. That's how we build life in the soil. On the no harm side, we don't want to kill the life that we're trying to build. Most of the chemicals we use will kill life. So pesticides, fungicides, herbicides, miticides, the fertilizers I just spoke about, all of these will kill those living organisms within the soil. Not only that, but driving heavy equipment across soil, heavy foot track, anything that smashes the soil down, we call it compaction. All of these things are ways to kill the life that we need in the soil. So point it to everything, build healthy life in your soil and do your best not to kill it. If you do that, many of your plants are going to be doing great. All right, that is a big one. So I'm actually going to take questions there before we move on to the next topic. What are your questions on this?
So let me just mute some. So Basil, one question came in about wood chips, and should we be concerned at all about fresh arborist wood chips? Are they doing any kind of robbing of nitrogen? or anything bad to the soil as they break down?
It's a great question. And the research is really conclusive on this point. The answer is no, they don't. They may draw nitrogen from the upper couple of millimeters of the soil. Millimeters are very, very, very small, but you do not have to worry about wood chips robbing nitrogen. Now, if you were to start turning the wood chips into the soil, and I'm talking using a shovel and digging out soil, which I can't imagine you would want to do that to your plants anyway. That would be a different story, but laying them on top will not rob nitrogen. And I'll go ahead and get ahead of another 2 or 3 questions I usually get, which is, do we have to worry about pests? No, with one caveat that I'll get to. But if you're worried about fungal pathogens, just remember, most of the fungal pathogens that we deal with, your rusts, your leaf spots, your, there's a whole host of them. They float for miles. They're everywhere in the air. It's kind of like the human cold. The cold is everywhere. When we're stressed and we have weak immune systems, we get sick because sickness is always around us. Similarly, trees that are stressed and sick will catch these diseases and have these issues, but the healthy trees won't. They have an immune system, air quotes, it's different. They can defend themselves against these pests. So you don't have to worry about things being in the wood chips. The only class of pests we have to worry about are the invasive pests. So emerald ash borer right now is a real problem in North Carolina. The spotted lanternfly is soon to be a problem. The red ambrosia beetle in the east of the coast is a problem. Up in the mountains, the woolly adelgid. There's a handful of invasive pests we have to worry about. The laws are not to transport such wood chips, so I wouldn't imagine you'd have to worry about that. To be fair, even if you did get those wood chips, if your service provider is bringing them, most service providers have about a 20-mile radius max, and that's the radius of all of these invasive pests. So if it's in your area, it's already in your area. There's nothing, adding wood chips that have it are not going to make any appreciable difference.
So I believe that you're recommending, we're going to reach to our local arborists. Someone also put the website Get Chip Drop, which is a way to get on a list for free chips. So the way to get these arborist wood chips is to call around your local area. If you see someone who's doing some chipping, ask them for the chips. But like you say, it's also in a way a pretty local thing because the arborist is looking to dump those chips fairly close to where they just did the job.
Absolutely. And we have to pay. We have to pay to dump if we don't give them away for free. So we want to give them away.
Okay. Excellent.
We'll do another question or two if there is one, and then we'll go on to the next point.
So perhaps you could talk a little bit about leaving the leaves and utilizing wood chips, and talking about the breakdown that you see happening with someone maybe leaving a season of leaves, putting some wood chips on top, that robbing of nitrogen, which you just, talked about not happening. What instead is happening? You're increasing the life in the soil and you're getting pretty good breakdown and a nice leaf mold, right? What's happening?
Correct. Yes. The rate at which these products break down is going to be related to how healthy the soil is. So healthier soil, meaning there's more life, will feed faster. So not only is all that life in the soil feeding on the sugar from plants' roots, but they're also eating what we call organic matter. And that's just rotting stuff, basically. So healthy communities of soil microbes will eat leaves and wood chips quickly. If it's unhealthy, like maybe you live in an HOA that was just built in the last 10 years, it's likely to still be red clay if you're here in the Piedmont, sand if you're, not very healthy per se. So that's going to take a longer time to consume the leaves and wood chips. But in a healthy patch of soil, like for example, at my last house, I actually had to do wood chips twice a year because the soil would consume the wood chips so fast. It would go through 2 inches of wood chips in 6 months. Leaving the leaves at my old house they were gone in a month or two, just all gone. Now that's not going to happen for many sites. I happen to have great soil there, which I don't have that anymore, unfortunately. But I would expect for most of these products, leaves are going to be very broken down within a year. And within 2 years, they might already just look like black soil. Wood chips, I would say, are going to be a little bit longer of a time frame, maybe 2 to 3 years for many sites. And you can always monitor and replenish as you see fit. I'd recommend as many leaves as you want. You can't go wrong there. And for wood chips, anywhere between 2 and 6 inches is a great range.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. One quick question about pine shavings. Are you familiar with those and using those as a mulch? Do they simply differ from the chips in their fine quality?
Yeah. Pine. Okay. So pine bark, I'm not a big fan of just because it really takes a long time to break down. It doesn't have a ton of organic matter. They're meant to stay a long time. So that's the opposite of what we want. We want them to rot. Pine shavings are better than many products. I like pine shavings. The only bummer about them is it's a monocrop, let's just call it. It's just one kind of a wood product. Again, not a bad thing. It's better than most of the other products available out there. But we just don't get the diversity of plant parts that we get with arborist wood chips. I'll just add one layer of complexity. 50% of a tree's enzymes, nutrients, aminos, they are in the branches and small twigs and leaves. So when we get the wood chips that have the small branches and the bark and the leaves, we love that. And if we get lots of different tree species, that's great because you're providing a buffet of options for life in the soil. More diversity of plant parts and plant species means more soil microorganisms will be there. So I like pine shavings, but I like wood chips better.
Okay, thank you. Lastly, let's just touch on pine straw, and then I think we should move on from there. What
Perfect.
are your thoughts on pine straw?
I like pine straw. It has value, but like pine bark, it does break down slowly. So, which is the opposite of what we want. We want things that are breaking down quickly so as to feed that life in the soil. One of the things I typically recommend with pine straw is if you like the aesthetic, rake it aside, put a layer of wood chips down, and then put your pine straw back on top. It's usually pretty easy to pull back and put back. And then you can have those aesthetic qualities you like while still getting the heavy duty work with the wood chips underneath.
Good point.
All
And
right.
Charlotte has just mentioned that, keeping in mind how flammable pine straw is, and that we want to keep that away from our structures. You don't want it right up against your home.
Yeah, there are, if you live in an HOA especially, there could be codes on that. So yeah, pine straw can be flammable, and be mindful of that. But that's in the context of your home, not the tree.
Right. All right. Thank you.
Perfect. And that's a picture of arborist wood chips right there, in case you were wondering. All right, let's go to maintenance. I really want to focus on just a few highlights of maintenance. We talked about planting. With planting, I'm going to just hit the really big important things. We often see staking systems left on trees and then they kill those trees. So the basics about watering and many of these things, but this is an area that we often see as being missed. So if you plant trees or you advise other people and they use a staking system, just make sure they know they need to go back in 2 to 3 years and get that system off the tree, or it could actually strangle it. When we talk about pruning, I don't want to talk much about proper pruning because I know that everybody here knows this topic so well. This is, amongst people who know trees and plants, this is pretty well known, but I just want to show you this diagram. I don't have an indicator here on the screen, but you can see from the labels, it's something called a branch collar on both of these pictures. It is very important that cuts be made exactly outside of the branch collar. Too far out and too far in can lead to decay in the tree. And we certainly don't want to pay our pruners to kill our trees. The one bummer about this is that it often takes a decade to show up. If we cut too far in on the branch collar or too far out, and we create this decay into the tree, it moves very slowly. There's no stopping it. The branch collar, when we make the cut right outside of the collar, that heals over the wound and seals decay from advancing further into the tree. So very important. And then the other part of maintenance that I want to talk about is a concept called structural pruning. If I could limit tree care to 2 words, the most important 2 words. And this is for the urban setting, okay? This is not for forestry and things like that. It's soil and it's structure. So structure, if you look to these 2 trees are both red maples. On the left is a red maple growing in the forest, and on the right is a red maple growing in suburbia. Check out the difference. The one on the left has a straight central trunk. It goes up for a long distance before turning into small, well-spaced branches. That's happening because that maple is having to compete with other trees in the forest. When trees grow together, it forces them to grow up tall and straight and develop the way they're supposed to develop. On the right, we're looking at a maple that lives in suburbia where there is no competition and there's a lot of sunlight. This tree is fat and happy. And unfortunately, being fat and happy is going to potentially cost it its life later on. That large branch on the left side of the maple there, that is likely to split. And then if you look into the upper portion of the canopy, and we're looking on the tree on the right, there are many overgrown branches that are either growing out too far or they're just too big and too crowded, and they're all likely to split. So what we want to do is we want to train trees in the urban setting to be like trees in the forest. And this means we make cuts that reduce the length of these big branches. Structural pruning is a really big topic. I don't want to go to too much nuance, but what we attempt to do is we want to tell the tree, hey, stop putting growth out on these large branches and instead focus your growth into the center trunk. This is best started at a young age, but even with an older tree, there are definite gains that can be made. So as you're thinking about trees in the urban setting, don't forget structure, because we don't want the tree to accidentally kill itself by splitting. That means the tree is going to have to potentially be removed, and it might have just damaged a house or a car. So there's a two-way lose there. Let's stop at structure and pruning and this topic, and then we're going to go on to what is basically our final point. So any questions about pruning or some of the maintenance items we discussed on any of these slides here?
Well, Charlotte has been excellent keeping up with some of the questions from other topics. She's now been able to get into the chat, and we'll include these in the resources document. Some of the research on wood chips not being harmful and the misconceptions relating to nitrogen there. She's also linked to the plant toolbox a couple of times with specific questions. So I think we're in good shape, actually. To go ahead.
All right. Well, we're going to go to what is basically our last point, because the final point is just look to nature for guidance. A little teaser there. This is one I really love. This is rethinking lawns and big open spaces in HOAs, in business centers, you name it. But this is a meadow, which I've called here a Piedmont prairie, which is just a fun name. And this is an ecosystem of lots of native grasses and flowers. And it's very similar to what we discussed with the trees earlier. And basically what we do is we put down seed, and we're using native species. And the seed allows these plants to grow up in great density and then create a thriving ecosystem where birds and insects can live and feed. The reason it's so much better than traditional turf grass, I'll give you just a couple of little points here. One, it provides a lot more food and habitat for life, which is an important objective. Two, the root systems on these plants are far deeper than they are with turf grass. It's important to note that you can only build soil to the depth at which your roots go down. So for your normal fescue, you might see 3 inches of growth. And on screen, I'm showing about 3 inches here. Bermuda grass, zoysia, I don't even know if it even goes into the ground, quite frankly. Maybe a little bit, but we want things that are deeply rooted so that we can pull down lots of carbon and build lots of healthy soil where lots of life can live. These plants that I'm showing on screen, these often have root systems that go down between 2 and 8 feet over time. So the difference on the amount of carbon being pulled down, the life that is in this space is really, it is vast. Where you have deeper, richer, healthier soils, you're also pulling down more water. So we're getting back to this these big topics we opened the presentation with. We want to pull that water down. We don't want it to run off of our landscape. Not only do we lose that water, but it causes the erosion. So we're building soil, we're pulling down water, we're supporting life, and we're eliminating a lot of the practices that are required for turf grass. So if you think about, say, a lawnmower actually emits 10 times more emission than a car. So when you run a lawnmower for an hour, that's like driving your car for 10 hours. Fertilizers, they take a lot of energy to produce, a lot of resources extracted from the earth. Then they have to be transported. There's waste involved. There's carbon footprint. They go into the ground. They don't actually help anything. And instead they cause pollution. So simply by avoiding fertilizers, which we don't need for a Piedmont prairie, we're negating a whole host of negative impacts. We don't need irrigation for Piedmont prairie, so we're saving water. And y'all, water's a big deal. We use 1/3 of all publicly available water in the US to irrigate lawns. Lawns are the #1 crop grown in the US, ahead of even corn. And you know what the kicker is? Americans spend 90% of their time inside. So what are we doing? Like, using all these resources to take care of this place that provides no life so we can sit inside. I'm not saying we as in this call. I know many of you are avid gardeners and love this sort of stuff, but just as a whole, as the American sort of status quo. So this is a really great low-cost way to rethink a lawn. And I'd love to take questions on this, because this is another one of those sort of big topics. So if you have questions, let's do that. And we are really pretty much done with the presentation. So we'll take questions here. I'll go through a couple of final slides. It'll take about a minute, and then we could do a final Q&A.
Well, I think especially since the Master Gardener volunteers on this call share this information with others, if you could tell us a little bit about the establishment of a Piedmont prairie, the process of establishment, the process of maintenance. Those are going to be very practical questions that our volunteers are asked.
I'd love to do that. So let me walk you through the basic process. First, you have to kill the existing vegetation. That could be a turf grass. It could also just be an old field. What I'm going to say next is a little sacrilegious, but it is just the result of lots of work on our part and then reading other experts. But I do actually recommend a glyphosate to kill off the existing vegetation. Perhaps you can use a dark tarp or cardboard to smother maybe a fescue or some other sort of tame plants, but you will not be able to tame Bermuda, nor zoysia, nor old agricultural fields without the use of a glyphosate. I see this as 1 step back for 10 steps forward. So I think in the context of ecological restoration, glyphosate is a useful and valuable tool. But in the context of food production or ongoing maintenance that never stops, I do not recommend we use glyphosate. That is a net negative. So we kill off the existing vegetation. Typically, you're going to need a full season for that. I would recommend buying a seed blend from Roundstone Seeds. They're my favorite. Close second would be Ernst. Third would be Garrett out of North Carolina. I love that we have a seed provider in North Carolina. They just don't have as much variety as I would like. But all three of those are really good organizations. And what I love about Roundstone is they have different grow sites, and one of them is down in South Carolina. So if you're buying seed for North Carolina, they're going to be shipping you seed from South Carolina. So that's pretty close in terms of an ecoregion. I'm getting a little complicated. I apologize. Buy a blend from Roundstone, and what you'll do is you'll clear the site of the existing vegetation that's now dead. So a rake is sufficient. Don't worry about getting the roots out. We actually want the roots to stay because they'll provide a little bit of erosion control. You'll put your seed out at the rate recommended on the package or on the website. I recommend using a plain kitty litter as your filler because you can't just spread seed. You'll want to bulk it up. Plain kitty litter is great. Once you get that down, you can either use straw or a jute fabric to hold everything in place. Jute fabric is a fabric that's made out of a plant material, and you can buy it from Home Depot or from Lowe's. I prefer jute. It's more stable, but it's also a lot more work. I would do all of this in fall. We prefer fall seedings. You could do spring, you can do summer even. Larry Weiner, who's written on this topic, he does it all year long. So you don't have to worry too much about the details. What comes next is very important. In the first growing season, so approximately beginning in, say, April, after your installation, you need to keep this area cut regularly. You can do it with a string trimmer, you can do it with a lawnmower that sits up real high, but we want to keep it cut to approximately 6 inches for the entire growing season. That's very important because it prevents our annual weeds from going to seed. That's key. If you can keep those annual weeds from going to seed, you're going to have substantially reduced weed pressure the following year. In addition, that also opens up sunlight for many of these seeds to begin establishing. Don't water it. Don't fertilize it. We don't want to baby this. It needs to be able to survive on its own. And I always, it's tough love with plants for me. If you can't make it, then you weren't meant to be there anyway. And that's how we do Piedmont Prairies at Leaf and Limb. And it works well. Then you're going to get into your next dormant season, do nothing. Then you're going to approach your second growing season. So now we're April again, but it's it's a year later, year and a half, just depending on all these details, but it's the second growing season. And now we're going to keep the mowing regimen in place, but now we want to keep it more at the range of approximately 12 inches. If you know your plants well, there is a more nuanced approach here, which is what we do. We actually monitor weed pressure, but that does require you to know what is a weed. And remember, weeds aren't necessarily bad. They're just not the plants we want in that space. So if you can monitor weed pressure, if you have that knowledge, then you can actually tailor your cutting regimen based on weed pressure, meaning if there's a lot of weed pressure, cut more frequently. If there's not a lot of weed pressure, it might be good to go. When in doubt, and especially to the common person who doesn't really know what they're doing, keep it cut at 12 inches. After that, you should be good to go. For most sites, they will be good to go. There's more detail here. I don't want to necessarily plug Leaf and Limb, but I will just say we have a free book coming out in January that will give very detailed instructions on how to do this. So that, and it'll also have a detailed blueprint for Project Panda. So that there's a lot of cool stuff in there. So that's one option. There's also a great book that just came out that I like. It's called The Gardener's Guide to Prairies by Hillary Cox. It's brand new. One of the best. Larry Weiner's book, James Hitchmouth's book, Sowing Beauty, and Larry Weiner's book, goodness, I should know the name. Those are the best books right there on this topic.
We'll make sure we get that those lists of book names from you, Basil, and that gives us a good overview. I do think I had one question, which was relating to this jute fabric. You're putting it down when you've seeded, and then what? How do you remove it? Are you mowing over it? What's happening with the jute fabric?
No, it'll stay in place. And you actually, Home Depot and Lowe's also sell jute pins. So you pin it in the ground, but the jute rots. That's the beauty of it. It's a plant material. Awesome. So leave it in place until it's gone. Okay.
And then if you could briefly speak to maintenance after that. So you've got this establishment, you're pretty good with your weeds. What's it like then?
After that, it's a once a year cut, typically. Now, again, as with everything, we can get really nuanced and really detailed, but I'm trying to just keep it at the 80% here. And you'll cut once a year. In a perfect world, you would actually not cut until spring once the new growth just begins to emerge. That gives, let me back up. A lot of insects will go live in those stems in the fall, and they'll live there all winter, or they'll lay their eggs there. And we want to let those insects live their lives out. And they'll typically exit those stems right around the time new growth emerges. So in a perfect world, don't do your cut until the new growth emerges. But if that's simply not feasible, you could consider just cutting half of it so life can live in the other half. Or if it's just not possible, because I know how some HOAs can be, cut it all, but stage your material, your cut stalks somewhere on site, because many of the critters will still live in those stalks, and just make a brush pile, maybe out in the edge of the woods or something. A lot of life will still emerge from that. Oh, and
Very well
cost wise,
said.
y'all, just to put this in perspective, like, I'm going to mention this as comparison. This is not a sales point at all, but just comparison. Cost to plant and maintain this prairie for 3 years, getting it to establishment, runs about $3 a square foot at Leaf and Limb. To do the equivalent with a Bermuda sod, that's the sod, the installation, the maintenance for the years that follow, easily $50 a square foot. So this is actually not only a great thing, but it's cheaper too, and less work.
Well, I think you've said so much in this presentation that enables us to think broadly about how we can change our own practices and then advise others, which is the whole point of having our Master Gardener volunteers out there in the community. So I will let you, kind of wrap up with your last point, and then we'll take other questions. Perfect.
My last point, and this, by the way, was a little food web, sort of a meadow versus a lawn. Last point is, when in doubt, look to natural ecosystems. So much of our work at Leaf and Limb, but just in general, I mean, Alex Scheiga, who sort of founded the arboriculture industry for trees, so many great just observations based on what's happening in nature. So I think nature provides some really good guidance for what we should be doing. And I always like to use that. I also will mention that these natural systems that we're talking about are tried and true for millennia. So I think if we can simply lean into what nature wants to do anyway, we can get a lot of the positive impacts we're looking for: richer soil, more plant life, more non-human life, more water, less carbon in the atmosphere. This is my email. If you want to shoot me a note, assuming this is, this is some details here if you'd like. And we'll use whatever time we have left to answer questions, and I have nowhere to be, so this is up to y'all.
Excellent. Thank you, Basil. Yeah, I hope today that Master Gardener volunteers take away these points, these 8 particular strategies, which of course have detail within them, but they take those away as easy ways for them to communicate some of this to the public. When you boil it down to build healthy soil, right? Then you can get into talking to someone that you've met about a practical solution of switching the kind of mulch they use, or leaving their leaves. Or if we talk about, choosing a tree for their yard. Choosing native, choosing smaller. So all of these details within these concepts are right in line with how, we're sharing that information.
Yeah, and I attempted to sort of make it simple today, knowing that y'all know a lot, but just giving you some of the ways that I approach these topics, because I'm talking to people every day who don't know this stuff. And it's very hard to communicate these complex topics in easy ways. It really is maybe one of the most challenging things, is how do you take something as complicated as soil and give that to somebody who really knows nothing? So I hope that was helpful. Yes, and that's where you can see by our audience that their knowledge is there when they've got these, more detailed questions about fertilizers and nitrogen. Their knowledge goes deeper, but also it's that simplicity that we can use to communicate so effectively. So as I've been saying, and Charlotte has been excellent here in the behind the scenes in the chat, is we have compiled a resource document like we do after plants, pests, and pathogens that I will send out in an email, and also it will be posted on the EMG Intranet continuing education page. And that's a compilation of resources from NC State Extension, and also links to what Basil has shared is available on their website. But I do want to get from you, Basil, before we let you go, and I'm watching for any new questions, the names of those authors. I've taken down Hillary Cox is one of the new authors relating to prairies. Larry Weiner. WEANE. And James Hitchmow. Could you say that last one again for me? Sure. James Hitchmow, HITCHMOUGH. And that book, that was actually one of my starting points in all this work. He's a designer, and he's in the UK. So you have to take a lot of it with a grain of salt. All these, bad news, there's no book yet that's specific to our part of the country. So as you read these books, make sure you're sort of translating regional differences as you go.
Yes, excellent. We make that point a lot when we're looking at what kind of resource are we sharing? Does it apply to our area?
Yeah, and one
Um,
of the this is like a little bit of a complex pro tip, but if you want to like convert between here and say the Midwest, the conversion point is typically when does it soil temperatures reach about 50 degrees. That is when the growing season begins. So you can always translate your growing seasons based on soil temperatures hitting 50 degrees on both sides. That's the beginning of growing season. That's the end of growing season.
Excellent, excellent. Well, at this point, we just have lots of compliments coming in to the chat.
Thank you. I really appreciate you having me. This was really fun.
Yes, it's been excellent. And it's just nice to be able to share all this information and make people aware of what Leaf and Limb is doing, and just, like minds trying to spread good things.
Absolutely.
All right, well, we will wrap it up then. I'll stop the recording for now, and we will thank Basil once again for his time, his expertise, and his willingness to take questions from here. And as I said, we'll get those resources out to you.